Hello, my name's Matt Myers and I teach Roman history in the Department of Classics and Archaeology here at the University of Nottingham. I'm just making this video today to give you a quick introduction to the kind of things that I cover in my teaching and in my research. So, I'm a Roman historian and I teach Roman history beginning with the foundation of the city of Rome in 753 BC and going all the way down to the end of the Western Roman Empire in 476 AD. And actually continuing quite a bit beyond that as well. So within this very broad period of Roman history, the time that I'm most interested in is the transition between Republic and Empire. So the period in which the Roman world moves from being ruled by the Senate and a kind of semi-democratic form of government into the Empire and being ruled by emperors. So this is the period from the 1st century BC down to the end of the 1st century AD. And within this time frame, what I'm most interested in is the role of violence. So I spend a lot of time looking at things like warfare, crime and punishment, gladiatorial combat, those kind of things. And I think a lot about how these issues are represented in Roman literature and in Roman art and in the works of Roman historical writers. So I thought what I would do today is just give you a brief introduction to the kind of things that I look at by way of discussion of my 3 favourite books about ancient Rome. So the first of which is this one. So this is of course the Horrible History's Rotten Romans, and this is my first ever introduction to Roman history back when I was probably about 8 or 9 years old. And I hadn't looked at this book for a long time. I pulled it off the shelf today and it turns out that it is very closely aligned to my current interests in the ancient world. I think subconsciously I've followed the content of this book quite closely in my teaching and in my research. So as I say, I'm very interested in issues of violence, warfare, gladiatorial combat, that kind of thing. And that is of course something that is covered in a lot of detail in this book. So there we have the depiction of a battle in Roman Britain. Here's a depiction of gladiatorial combat. And of course this book also discusses a lot of the early Roman emperors who populate the period in which I am interested, such as Caligula, who famously made his horse a consul, as we can see there. So this was a very influential book in bringing me to the study of the ancient Romans. And it also introduced me to some of my favourite ancient sources, the first of which is this one. So this is the 12 Caesars by Suetonius. So Suetonius is a Roman biographer, and his 12 Caesars are lives of the early Roman emperors, beginning with Julius Caesar and ending with the Emperor Domitian. Now what makes Suetonius really valuable as a historical source is that he was not just a writer but also a politician, and he was the secretary to the Emperor Hadrian. And this meant that he had unprecedented access to the imperial archives and to court documents. And so he had access to a lot of primary sources that modern historians just don't have. And so this makes him incredibly valuable for studying this period of Roman history. But he's also really interesting from a literary perspective because he's not afraid to bring in rumour and unsubstantiated claims if it will help him depict his subject in a certain way. And so issues of literary style and characterisation are just as important in studying Suetonius as they are in studying in literary genres such as poetry and drama. And Suetonius is not just important as a historical source but also as a piece of literature. And the same is true of other ancient historians, particularly my favourite ancient historian, and that is Tacitus. And you can see just how much I love Tacitus by the amount of sticky notes sticking out of my books there. So Tacitus is another Roman historian who is writing around the same time period as Suetonius, maybe 5 to 10 years before Suetonius was writing. And he deals with pretty much the same period of history. He's writing about the early Roman emperors. His Annals is his most famous work, and that deals with the emperors from Augustus to Nero. But what I want to talk to you today about is Tacitus' Histories, which I think are often overlooked, but are actually some of his best work. So the Histories are a narrative of the aftermath of the suicide of the Emperor Nero. So in June of AD 68, the Emperor Nero was the victim of a conspiracy and he was forced to commit suicide. And this plunged the Roman world into a year-long destructive and bloody civil war, because no one could decide who was going to take over and who was going to become the next emperor. And there were 4 different people who claimed the throne, and they fought this civil war throughout the Roman Empire and Italy itself. And this is a war that is now called the Year of the 4 Emperors. And this is the subject of the surviving portions of Tacitus' Histories. And what I find most fascinating about Tacitus' narrative of this war in the Histories is his focus on the emotional experiences of the participants. So Tacitus is a really valuable source for the insight he gives us into people's reactions to and experiences of violence and warfare in ancient Rome. Some of his most poignant and moving passages depict soldiers in the aftermath of battles kind of lamenting the loss of life and the senseless violence that they've just taken part in. And often what is really interesting is the reactions of these soldiers are contrasted with the emotional state and the reactions of their generals and commanders, who tend to exult in the violence and are unable to see the inherent sadness in the situation. So Tacitus gives us a really interesting insight into the differing reactions to violence among different levels of society in ancient Rome. So I could talk to you about Tacitus all day, and maybe I will in another video, but for now I think we'll leave it there, and I will just end by saying I hope to see as many of you as possible very soon in Nottingham.